My name is Emma Whitmore, and my story begins with a door closing, not metaphorically, a real heavy oak door on a California estate, slamming shut with finality that echoed through my bones. I was 5 years old, and my parents were leaving me. That afternoon is tattooed on my memory in perfect, painful detail. The Santa Barbara sun was performing its golden hour magic, but the air between my parents was cold enough to frost glass. My mother, Victoria, in a white dress that seemed to glow against her tan, knelt before me. Her lilac perfume, usually a comfort, that day smelled like a lie being packaged beautifully. "Be good for Grandpa, sweetheart," she said, her voice syrup-sweet but strained at the edges. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never really did, I realize now. My father, Charles, leaned against their silver convertible, a study in impatience. "Victoria, the flight," he called, tapping his expensive watch. "Flight?" I remember grabbing the fabric of her dress, the linen crisp under my small fingers. "Where are you going? Can I come?" For a single, terrifying heartbeat, her perfect mask slipped. I saw it. Not love, not regret, but a frantic calculation. How to extract herself. She recovered instantly, kissing the air beside my cheek, her diamond earring grazing my skin. "Grown-up trip, darling. We'll be back before you know it." The click of her heels on the gravel driveway was the sound of my childhood ending. The car door slammed, the engine purred, and I stood there, a little girl in a yellow sundress, watching my entire world recede down the winding drive and vanish behind wrought iron gates. Something primal broke in me then. I ran, my legs, short and chubby, pumping as fast as they could. I chased the shimmer of chrome, the dust cloud, the ghost of them. "Mommy! Daddy! Wait!" I screamed until my voice was raw, until I tripped on the uneven road and skidded on my knees, the gravel biting deep. I was still there, sobbing into the dirt, when a shadow fell over me. Not a threatening shadow, a solid, steady one. Then large, gentle hands were lifting me. Grandpa Henry. He didn't say a word. He simply brushed the gravel from my bleeding knees with his handkerchief, his touch infinitely careful. He smelled of pipe tobacco and old books, a smell that would forever mean safety. He carried me back to the mansion, my head against his shoulder. At the grand front door, he paused and looked back down the empty drive. "They don't understand what they've lost, my dear Emma," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But their loss is my profound gain." That night, in the vast, too quiet kitchen, he made me cocoa himself. No maids, no butlers, just him, moving with a quiet certainty in the massive space. "Extra marshmallows, right?" he asked, and when I nodded, tears dripping into the steam, he didn't tell me to stop crying. He let me leap. When he tucked me into the giant bed in the guest room, a room that would become mine, the house felt like a living thing breathing around us. It was full of silence, but his presence filled the emptiness. "Will they come back?" I whispered into the dark. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. He was quiet for so long I thought he hadn't heard me. "Some doors, once closed, should remain shut," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It keeps the drafts out." He leaned closer, and in the faint light from the hall, I saw his eyes, kind and sad. "You will never have to chase love again, Emma. From this day forward, love lives right here. It is your birthright in this house." He kissed my forehead and left the door open a crack. I fell asleep to the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that became the heartbeat of my new life. The obedient, performative daughter of Charles and Victoria Whitmore died on that driveway. Someone else was being born in her place. The apprenticeship. Life with Grandpa Henry was an education, but not the kind you find in schools. He was Henry Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Industries, a man who controlled shipping lanes and moved markets, yet he believed his most important legacy was integrity, and he was determined to pass it on to me. Every morning at 6 a.m., his soft knock would sound on my door. The world doesn't wait for dreamers, Emma. It's shaped by doers. I'd stumble to the kitchen where he'd be with his black coffee and the Wall Street Journal. He'd tap a headline. Read this. Now tell me what they're not saying. Where's the lie hiding? At first, I just saw words, but he taught me to read between them, to see the fear behind a CEO's boast, the desperation in a politician's promise. Truth, Emma, is a layered thing. Most people are satisfied with the surface paint. You must learn to sand it down to the grain. He brought me to board meetings when I was 12. I'd sit in the corner, a notebook in my lap. Watch their hands, he'd murmur during a break. Listen to what they don't say. The man arguing loudest is often the most afraid. He taught me that power, real power, wasn't about shouting. It was about the quiet certainty that made others stop to listen. When I was 16, he gifted me a beautiful leather-bound journal. The cover was supple brown leather, embossed with a simple W. "This is for your truth," he said, his hands, weathered and strong, wrapping mine around it. "The world will try to give you its version, politicians, media, even people who claim to love you. Write your own version here. Anchor yourself." I wrote in it every night. Silly things at first, about a boy at school, about a book I loved. Then, as his lessons took root, I began writing my observations, my analysis of the news, my understanding of his lessons. I didn't know it then, but I was building my own arsenal. My parents existed as flickering ghosts on the periphery of our world. Sometimes I'd see them on a magazine cover in a grocery store, the Whitmore's philanthropic triumph, or Charles and Victoria saving the oceans. Grandpa would quietly place another item in front of the magazine rack. He never badmouthed them. He didn't have to. Their absence was a louder condemnation than any words. Once, when I was about 19, a particularly glossy spread showed them at a gala in Monaco. My mother wore a dress that cost more than most people's cars. My father's smile was blindingly white. I stared at it for a long time. "Do you miss them?" Grandpa asked from his armchair, not looking up from his book. I thought about it. I thought about the cold perfume, the impatient tapping, the empty promises. I thought about the solid warmth of the man in the chair, the cocoa with extra marshmallows, the patient lessons. "I miss the idea of them," I said finally, my voice surprisingly steady, "not the reality." He looked up then, and his eyes held a pride that warmed me from the inside out. "Good. Sentimentality for a mirage will leave you dying of thirst in the desert." He was preparing me. For what? I wasn't entirely sure. To run the company, perhaps, to be a good person. I now realize he was preparing me for war. The inheritance and the declaration of war. Grandpa Henry died on a Tuesday. I found him in his study, slumped over his desk, his reading glasses askew. An open ledger was before him, his pen still in his hand. The last line he'd written was, "Quarterly projections show resilience, but ethical supply chain audit remains paramount." He died in the middle of a sentence about integrity. It was fitting. The grief was a physical thing, a hollowing out. The mansion, once full of his quiet presence, was just a big, empty house. The funeral was a spectacle. Governors, senators, celebrities, they all came to pay homage to Henry Whitmore. And there, in the front row, dressed in impeccably somber black, were my parents. 22 years. Not a card, not a call on my birthday, but they were here for the finale. My mother approached me afterward, a black lace veil doing little to hide her assessing gaze. "Emma," she said, as if testing the name, "you look well." I replied, my voice flat, and she did. Time had been kind, or surgery had been diligent. "We should talk," my father said, his hand on her arm. "As a family, there are things to discuss." Before I could form a retort, Mr. Briggs, Grandpa's attorney, announced the reading of the will in the library. The room was packed with the powerful and the curious. The will was straightforward and brutal. Every share, every property, every asset of the Whitmore empire was left to my beloved granddaughter Emma Catherine Whitmore in full and clear trust of her character. There was a single separate clause. To my son, Charles, and his wife, Victoria, I leave my collection of antique maps. May they finally learn to read the territory, not just admire the frame. The silence was absolute, then explosive. My father shot to his feet, his face mottled with rage. This is an outrage. He was clearly not in his right mind. She manipulated him. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Mr. Briggs, an unflappable man in his 70s, adjusted his glasses. Henry Whitmore was assessed by 3 independent geriatric psychiatrists last month at his own request. He was deemed to be of exceptional mental acuity. The will is ironclad. My mother's composure was a sheet of ice over fury. "We will challenge this," she said, her voice low and venomous. "That money is ours. That legacy is ours. You are an interloper." I looked at them, these beautiful, angry strangers who shared my DNA, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear certainty. You abandoned your legacy on a driveway 22 years ago. He was my legacy, and he chose me. The lawsuit arrived a week later. Charles and Victoria Whitmore versus Emma Whitmore. The claim? Undue influence, elder fraud. They painted a picture for the media of a reclusive, confused old man and a cunning, greedy granddaughter who had isolated him and poisoned his mind. The headlines were savage. Billionaire heroine accused of stealing family fortune. My parents gave tearful interviews on morning talk shows, playing the heartbroken parents robbed of their birthright. I sat in Grandpa's study, the legal papers spread before me like a declaration of war. I was no longer grieving. I was furious, and I was prepared. I opened the top drawer of his desk. There, beneath his stationery, was his journal, not mine, his, the one he'd written in for 50 years. I opened it. I read his words, his private thoughts, his clear-eyed assessments of the world and the people in it. This was my ammunition. This was my truth. The courtroom felt like a stage set for my execution. My parents and their lawyer, a sleek shark named Elliot Graves, looked like they'd already written the victory speech. I sat with my lawyer, Robert Hayes, a man whose calm demeanor was a fortress. Then Judge Marcus Nolan entered. His reputation for being no-nonsense was palpable. He surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on me. He paused. He took off his glasses, squinting slightly. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice unexpectedly not booming, "would you approach the bench?" A murmur rippled through the gallery. I stood, my legs steady, and walked forward. Judge Nolan studied my face for a long moment. A strange, soft recognition dawned in his eyes. "You're Henry's girl," he murmured, almost to himself. Then, louder for the room, "I clerked for your grandfather 40 years ago. He was the finest man I ever knew. He told me once, 'Marcus, if my granddaughter ever stands in your courtroom, you listen to her. She'll be speaking with my voice.'" You could have heard a pin drop. The first crack in my parents' facade appeared, a tiny tick in my father's jaw. The trial proceeded. Graves put on his show, hired experts testifying to classic signs of elder manipulation, former staff members my parents had paid handsomely to imply I'd restricted access. My mother took the stand, a masterpiece of performed grief. She dabbed at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, her voice breaking as she spoke of just wanting to see Daddy in his final days. It was nauseating. It was also compelling television. Then Robert Hayes stood. "Your Honor, the defense would like to submit into evidence the personal diaries of Henry Jacob Whitmore, spanning the last decade of his life." Graves objected vehemently. "Hearsay, inadmissible." Judge Nolan silenced him with a look. "The deceased's state of mind is the very heart of this case, counsel. I'll allow it." A large screen descended. Robert placed the first journal under the evidence camera. Grandpa's bold, distinctive handwriting filled the screen. He started reading entries from years ago. November 12th, Charles called again. Another can't-miss venture in Dubai. He sees the world as a slot machine. He doesn't understand that real wealth is built with patience and principle. spent the afternoon with Emma in the garden. She asked how the supply chain for our coffee works, wanting to know if the farmers were paid fairly. She is 8. She already has a better moral compass than her father will ever possess. June 3rd, a card from Victoria for my birthday, a generic, store-bought sentiment. She remembers the date, but has never known the man. Emma baked a cake. It was lopsided and too sweet. It was the best gift I've ever received. Entry after entry flashed on the screen, his lucid observations of world markets, his philosophical musings, and woven through it all, his clear-eyed, often painful commentary on his son and daughter-in-law, and his growing, documented pride in me. Then Robert presented the final volume, the one from his last year. The writing was sometimes shakier, but the mind was diamond sharp. September 18th. The doctors gave me the news today. Less time than I'd hoped. My only regret is that I won't see the woman Emma becomes. I have no concerns for Whitmore Industries. She is ready. She is more than ready. My fear is for her heart. Charles and Victoria will come for the money. They are locusts. I have fortified the legal gates, but I must fortify her spirit. She must know, in her bones, that she is worthy of all this, not because of blood, but because of character. The courtroom was utterly still. Robert turned to the very last entry, dated 2 days before he died. To whoever reads this, if you are in a courtroom, it means they have come as I predicted. Know this, my mind was my own until my last breath. My fortune was mine to bestow. I chose Emma not out of weakness, but of supreme confidence. She is my truth, and in the end, truth is the only inheritance that cannot be stolen. Let this record stand. Robert stopped reading. The silence was profound, sacred. Then a choked, ragged sound. It came from the plaintiff's table. My father, Charles Whitmore, had his face in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. When he looked up, his carefully constructed persona was gone. In its place was a raw, broken man, drowning in shame. He stood, his chair scraping loudly. "Your Honor," he croaked, his voice shattered, I withdraw the suit. All of it." My mother gasped. "Charles, have you lost your mind?" He turned on her, and the look on his face was one of pure, unvarnished horror. "Look at what we've done, Victoria. Look at what we are. He saw it. He wrote it down. We're the villains in his story because we're the villains in every story." He looked at me then, and the apology in his eyes was 22 years too late, but it was real. "I'm sorry, Emma, for all of it, for leaving you, for this grotesque performance. He was right about everything." Judge Nolan, for the first time, showed a flicker of emotion, a deep, weary sadness. Case dismissed with prejudice. He looked at my parents. "I suggest you find a better use for your time and resources, perhaps some honest introspection." The aftermath and the real legacy. The media cyclone died down. The story of the diary eclipsed the story of the lawsuit. My parents' polished image was left in tatters. My mother divorced my father shortly after and fled the country, a pariah among the circles she once ruled. My father, he stayed. He sold his vanity projects, he moved into a small apartment, and he started writing me letters, not emails, handwritten letters. They were awkward, full of stilted apologies and painful self-revelation. He started therapy. He began volunteering, not for photo ops, but in the soup kitchen at the community center Grandpa had built. It's been 3 years. We are not a fairy tale. We will never have the father-daughter relationship we should have had. The bridge was burned a long time ago, and you can't rebuild with ashes. But we are building a footpath, a narrow, careful path of cautious honesty. He is trying to become a man Grandpa might have recognized, and I am learning to see the human being beneath the failed performance. Tonight, I'm in the study. I run Whitmore Industries now. We've doubled down on Grandpa's ethical mandates. The fortune is not a toy, it's a tool. I fund literacy programs, ethical microloans, and climate research. The Whitmore legacy the media talks about now is different. On my desk, side by side, sit two journals, his and mine. His, the evidence that saved me. Mine, where I now write my own story, in my own hand. They came for $1 billion fortune. What they unleashed was the power of a simple, written truth. They thought they could claim an inheritance of money and prestige, but Grandpa knew the real inheritance was unshakable self-worth, a moral compass that doesn't waver, and the quiet, fierce knowledge that you are loved not for what you can provide, but for who you are. My name is Emma Whitmore. I was abandoned on a driveway. I was raised in a library of love and principle. I was attacked in a courtroom of greed, and I was saved by the words of the only father I ever truly had. My revenge was not in winning the case. My revenge is the life I'm living, a life built on his truth and now slowly becoming my own.